Dr. Delaine, probably has his own things that he wants to add to, but he is an assistant professor here at Ohio State. He'll probably tell you a bit about his group. And then he has a background in electrical engineering. So he's a fellow EE like me. But I'll pass it to him and let him highlight anything else in his bio that he wants to highlight. So thank you for being here and thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Taylor, and thank you to everyone and welcome. It's exciting to have the opportunity to present my seminar, as you can see on the title here, Transforming Service Learning and Engineering from Service to Reciprocal Partnership in Support of Social Justice. We appreciate all of you taking the time to be here with us. On behalf of the Ohio State University Department of Engineering Education, we are thankful. I crafted an ambitious talk, and so we'll just jump right in. We'll start with an introduction of our research group and what we do. And so we call ourselves the Inclusive Community-Based Learning Lab, and we aim to understand the ways in which community-based learning and engineering impacts both students and participating stakeholders, that and there being a critical piece. We do this to promote social justice through broadening participation in engineering. If you want to think of us quickly, just remember our tagline, and that is partnering with communities while developing engineers. Again, our group, the Inclusive Community-Based Learning Lab. And so I've been thinking about a meaningful way of presenting our ideas in this seminar. In person, I think I'm an engaging and I think a good communicator. Over Zoom, it just feels weird and I dislike this. And so I'm saddened that it can't be with all of you in person, but I think we all understand why. Nonetheless, I wanted to include something here that I've been referring to as somewhat of a vulnerability statement. And so the first idea being that in this seminar, myself and my team, we are not here and we do not pretend to have all the answers. This presentation, this discussion is in fact a search for answers and not a delivery of those answers. We value the knowledge that's developed by each individual through their lived experiences. And we recognize that everyone has something meaningful to provide to a conversation, especially one like this. Tying into that idea is the fact that we want to hear from you. And so we're hoping through along this discussion, we can have respectful discourse throughout. We recognize that as individuals, each of us are flawed, each of us have our research blind spots, yet myself and our group, we do our best to produce high quality research with relevant outcomes. I think our team has been doing great work, and in part because we do question ourselves. We are unsure about our work, we make mistakes, we get nervous, but we persist and we're happy to be here to show you what we've been up to. We want your feedback, we want respectful critiques, and we want more of you to kind of jump on board with us as we advance this mission. We want to work with you, friends and colleagues, both near and far. So thanks again for being here. All right, and so today we will cover the following. First, we'll set the stage by looking briefly at what are some common perceptions about what service learning is. If you have not yet, check the chat. There is a link. Use that Jamboard, throw in a sticky note, and we'll get to that in a few minutes to see what we're thinking service learning is and does. We will then briefly explore 3 of our research projects to see how we can dispel some of the more problematic assumptions that students, professors, and people in general often hold about service learning and engineering. We will finish by together, I'm hoping in a discussion, exploring how this research intersects with some of the most pressing issues of today. More specifically, the Black Lives Matter movement and the COVID pandemic. In general, I try not to put too much into presentations, but I think I often get excited and I overdo it. So in anticipation of this, I encourage all of you to hang out afterwards and we can have a continued discussion. To reach out for me for a meeting, I would love to discuss any ideas, collaborations, and all those things about this work moving forward. All right, so again, the link to the Jamboard is in the chat. Let's take a look and see what we've generated there so far. Am I still sharing my desktop? Everyone can see the Jamboard. Cool. All right, so Here we have, it's great to see a number of contributions so far. We're seeing that service learning is a form of experiential education. That's great. It's impactful, experiential, intercultural. Um, Here's one that we commonly see. Service learning is not as rigorous as industry projects. Very interesting. Would be interesting to see if we think that's a good thing or a bad thing. Um, Service learning gives students experiences they wouldn't normally encounter. It facilitates authentic cultural engagement. There's a lot of really wonderful ideas here. And so this is a good start. I want us all to continue to use this Jamboard throughout our presentation. And so let's keep that active. As a backdrop to our conversations, we can circle back to it, and my research team will find a way to do something interesting with that. So please continue to share your thoughts there. Um, so we'll keep that going, but let's look more specifically at what the literature says people specifically think about service learning in engineering and in general through these assumptions. So in general, service learning is good. Service learning is performed by good people. That's a good one, and we hope that that's always true. Service learning provides an important or helpful service to the community. Um, Service learning is secondary to the core needs and functioning of higher education and engineering education. We may find that true, as there aren't service learning courses aren't everywhere. Every course is in a service learning course, nor perhaps should it be. Service learning is considered often to be atheoretical, meaning that it's not built on evidence or built on prior work. Um, we saw this one, we saw these next two on the Jamboard. Service learning provides education through real world experiences, and students are exposed to social challenges and problems. Service learning provides for border crossing. That's the concept that students are placed and immersed in environments that they aren't used to, a new and an unfamiliar place, or perhaps even a whole new country where they literally cross a border. Um, Related to this is the concept that students will go through eye-opening and first-time experiences. And tying all of these together is the idea that service learning will positively impact students. So these are some of the more common assumptions about what service learning is and does. But what do we do with these, right? How do we know what service learning is really doing in engineering? What kind of engineers are being shaped by service learning? And how are the communities being impacted? Right, these assumptions tell us what we commonly believe, but we don't know what's actually happening without high quality research. And so even beyond that, it might not be obvious, but some of these assumptions are problematic. And so let's see how my research agenda can support positive advancement of what we commonly know and believe service learning to be within engineering contexts. All right, so here is the kind of the broad proposition of my research. We start with community-based learning. And so community-based learning, you can see the definition here, refers to any pedagogical tool in which the community becomes a partner in the learning. And now this CBL approach allows us to explore partnerships between university and community members and determine the ways in which students embrace, are challenged by, and grow from interactions with these non-university, non-engineering stakeholders. These stakeholders are often referred to as the communities in service learning efforts, and we'll speak about those more. Service learning and engineering, engineering CBL, community-based learning, is most often implemented through three parallel but differing pedagogies: service learning, outreach, and volunteerism. In our talk today, we're going to focus on service learning. We propose through our research that community-based learning in engineering can be oriented towards broadening participation in social justice, and that we must enact a critical approach with a focus on reciprocal partnership, power, and race within community-based learning in order for the practice of CBL to promote social change. And so that's kind of the foundation of our research and what we will be going after here. And so as engineering educators, our research and our practice must be relevant. We must be connected to what's happening in the world today and what our students need to be professionals and citizens and people in the world tomorrow. Currently, few things are more pressing than the impact that inequalities are having on our world. And so, right, this brings us to the current challenges that are really crippling a large part of our society today. The Black Lives Matter movement, the destruction of COVID-19, and of course, the intersection between the oppression of communities of color and Black communities and the higher impacts that's being seen in those communities based on COVID. Furthermore, we can acknowledge how the current racial climate is impacting the Black students in our college at Ohio State University by this powerful document that was put together by the students of the National Society of Black Engineers that discusses how they are facing oppression within the college. A very powerful document. And now, in general, service learning should be able to align with these issues. Service learning should be able to provide solutions and ways in which engineering can positively impact these challenges. And so throughout our seminar, we hope that each of you reflect on how service learning can be directly linked to these challenges. I push and I challenge each of us through this talk to come up with concrete ways that our personal involvement with engineering education or whichever field you may be in can support these pressing issues, either through service learning or an area of your own focus. After the talk and on an ongoing basis, let's work together to make sure that this happens. We will circle back to this at the end of our talk. And so in our research today, I will look at 3 problematic assumptions, more specifically, and through each we will point to one project to show how the assumption can be adjusted, tweaked, or dispelled in order to make service learning more oriented towards social impact and social justice. So let's explore each of these one at a time. I'll present all 3 of them now, and then we'll go one by one. So assumption 1, students will be positively impacted through interactions with the service learning community. Assumption number 2, service learning students learn hands-on skills by delivering engineering solutions to communities in need. And assumption number 3, service learning is atheoretical and university-centric. So we'll walk through these each one by one. The first one, students will be positively impacted through interactions with service learning community. So we're working to dispel this one through our first project. And so in general, as we discussed, service learning provides students with the concept of border crossing experiences, where they are immersed in unfamiliar environments. So here you see this person here in the green color is immersed in an environment with these people who are orange. And so in general, we don't know what our engineering students in these contexts are thinking about. How are they perceiving, how are they interpreting, and how are they learning and growing from these interactions? We think that they're positive, but the literature shows that within service learning, students find themselves underprepared to engage with others in these environments. Studies have warned that when poorly implemented, service learning can lead to unanticipated and negative outcomes, such as an increased amount of prejudice and an increased reliance on stereotypes. One of the main elements of service learning is these border crossings. Yet we often find that in practice, learning outcomes around these interactions are implicit or not focused on at all. And so overall, this points to the fact that there are problematic elements of the interactions with communities, and these can reinforce stereotypes and social hierarchy. And so this points to this image here that situates this study. So in service learning, students can go through a range of experiences when they interact with potentially unfamiliar, often underserved and marginalized and or communities of color. And so this image here illustrates how university students within a service learning context can act differently, where, for example, student A approaches but doesn't fully engage with the community. Student B works to fully immerse themselves in this community, and student C chooses to disengage from the community altogether, remaining distant. And now, so our work is not seeking to rank or suggest which one of these students is behaving best, because that's dependent on the context. There could be some scenarios where cultural norms might suggest that remaining distant might be the best approach. And so we initiated research to more closely analyze these experiences so that we can be sure and we can teach students to pull out positive learning outcomes from partnering with these communities and not further alienate themselves or alienate the communities further within our society. And so this points to a study led by Amina Shermadou. Now, Amina is an emerging scholar in engineering education research, and she is pursuing a tenure track professorship in engineering education. And so I will say that again, shameless plug for a wonderful student. Amina is looking for a tenure track job. She is an absolutely wonderful future star in this field. I'm sure if you look at all the cameras, you'll see all of our EED community members nodding at how wonderful Amina is. And so in this work, we seek to answer the following research question: how do engineering students make sense of encounters with cultural differences while participating in international service learning experiences? And so this research is guided by two main ideas: intergroup contact theory, which broadly suggests that when two differing groups come together, certain elements must be in place for them to separate with positive outcomes and interactions and thoughts of each other. Things like equal status, a certain amount of time for interaction, and operating under the same sets of rules and norms. We already know in service learning, those things are not generally true. The next part of our conceptual framework is this model of intercultural maturity. And that's basically points to the idea of cultural competence, where the extent to which someone has comfort and an ability to interact and deal with people from different backgrounds is reflected. But here, this model places cultural competence, intercultural competence on a developmental scale, allowing us to categorize or bin where students fall within service learning. And so this research is qualitative, relying on a series of reflection prompts, both pre and post trip, and then we purposefully select interviews from the students to explore how they interact with the community when the service learning effort is complete. And so we have some initial impressions. Our analysis is still ongoing, but one of the first things that jumped out at us is that students indeed have strong preconceived notions about the community. For example, they consider that theft and crime is more probable in these international communities, that people abroad have a poor quality of life, cities are unsanitary, people are living in extreme poverty. These all kind of point to the idea that West is the idea that West is best, that the way we do things in the United States should be replicated, and those who aren't doing things the way that we are here are doing them wrong or could be doing them better. And so this points to some of the problematic elements that students are going into the trips with. And so how do they come out? And so again, this analysis is ongoing, but we're finding that students struggle to make sense of these encounters. And so now make sense is in quotes there because we're leaning on a model of what making sense actually means, where students go through an experience, ingest it, process it, and then act forward in the future, having reflected on that experience. And so it seems that students are living these experiences, but then aren't adjusting their behaviors in accordance with what they've learned. We've also found that students face challenges in managing basically their sadness or gratitude, uncertainty. Their emotions can sometimes be overwhelming, which inhibits them from getting to deeper levels of learning outcomes. We also find that students do not really recognize the broad implications of their presence in some of these communities. For example, if visiting an indigenous community, recognizing that European ancestors caused genocide in a lot of these communities. And so students aren't recognizing what their presence means to these communities when seeing white people can really throw some of the indigenous communities off in terms of what that historically means. And students just sometimes aren't acknowledging or even leaning on their awareness of this historical background. Lastly, students of color often approach service learning with a different mindset, and it seems to be based off of more kind of similarities in identity, similarities in background, and I'll leave it at that. All right, so this leads us back to our assumption, where it is assumed that students will be positively impacted through interactions with the service learning community. And while we would want this assumption to be true, this cannot be guaranteed. And so instead, our research points to this counter story where service learning can be a platform to support engineering student understanding of the importance of positive interactions with others. So rather than assuming that it happens, we teach and make sure that we know that this happens. And so we will kind of go through this exercise two more times. We've dispelled this first assumption and replaced it with something that we believe is more meaningful. And so now let's look at our second project and our second assumption. Here, service learning students learn hands-on skills by delivering engineering solutions to communities in need. And so let's explore this through our second project. And so we'll start with a brief discussion on how engineering happens within these service learning contexts. And so the solutions delivered within service learning contexts can often be hastily completed or break quickly once the students are done. You have students in development, engineers in training essentially, traveling anywhere from across the city to across the world, putting together projects in anywhere between a week and a semester, and assuming that those are going to solve someone's problems, right? That's in essence somewhat unrealistic. And so these can break quickly. Sometimes even students can provide the wrong solutions, which can sometimes exacerbate challenges, right? In general, the outcomes-oriented approaches are promoting the ideas that engineers swoop in and solve a problem, right? So those are all challenges. On the other hand, right, we know that teamwork, communication, and design are critical elements in engineering practice. And so service learning, right, because there is this interaction with non-universities, partners, clients, and everyday citizens, this pedagogy perhaps holds promise in promoting the development of professional skills. And so maybe we can offset some of the hands-on and increase some of the professional skills in these contexts. And so to approach this, we're basically looking at a concept that empathy is a critical skill and a skill that's important in engineering that links social and technical components in engineering context. And these may just be difficult to develop in the classroom. And so this leads us to this current study funded by the National Science Foundation that explores community-based learning, service learning included there, as a platform for developing empathy in engineering. And so in this work, we're leaning on this model for empathy in engineering, and we're analyzing student experiences towards furthering service learning as a tool for the instruction of empathy. And so this research is led by Jade Wang and performed in partnership with our co-PI and one of the developers of the model of empathy in engineering, Joachim Walter from University of Georgia. Now Jade has been an amazing leader in this project. And as she moves forward in her career, she's always an absolute pleasure to work with. She will be a powerful force in community-based learning moving forward, perhaps in China, perhaps here in the US, but she does seek to continue within academics doing similar research to this. And so again, a wonderful plug for a wonderful student. This study was designed across 3 phases. And so in the first phase, we set to determine a baseline. So how does service learning impact student levels of empathy? Here we collected both quantitative and qual data around students participating in a pre and post format. Here we sought to answer to what extent and in what ways can community-based learning contexts expose undergraduate engineering students to empathy? So that's the first phase of this research. We're primarily going to focus on this. I'll briefly give you some context to the rest of the study. In phase 2, we modified existing modules to teach empathy in engineering classrooms, and we modified them to be relevant in community-based learning context. We used data from phase 1 to contextually modify what's been already done in classrooms. Then in phase 3, we explicitly taught to empathy in service learning and community-based learning context, and again collected the same data to see, in essence, is this platform relevant and positive for teaching students empathy in the context of engineering? And so what are some of our preliminary qualitative findings? And again, here we're going to focus on our first research question: in what ways can community-based learning contexts expose undergraduate engineering students to empathy? And so we had 5 main themes emerge from our data. And for sake of time, I won't go into these in a lot of detail, but we basically have an entire paper coming out shortly on this entire concept and this entire framework. And Jade's dissertation work is jumping off from this point and really doing some wonderful things. And so our 5 themes, what are they? First, CBL structure. And that is the idea that a combination of the way that the actual course is developed and structured and the ways that students internalize the platform um, impacts their experience and how potentially fruitful it would be to empathy. For example, interaction with community members, whether it's single or repeated or continued immersion. Even in some cases that we looked at, the interactions with the community members was only hypothetical. And so in those cases, right, it becomes a little deeper to reach those, a little harder to reach those deeper levels of empathy development. Um, the next concept is this idea of encountering unfamiliarity, pointing back to the border crossing ideas. So in the instances where students are encountering unfamiliarity, we've noticed that some of them choose to either address or ignore what it is that's making them uncomfortable, right? And so they can disconnect emotionally or even logically from what it is that the main essence of the service learning effort is looking at. For example, if we're supporting students with disabilities, um, you know, they're unlikely to really address, well, what's it like to be disabled? Why am I providing this engineering solution to someone who is differently abled? Students aren't confronting the main essence of the service learning directly. The next piece is the interpersonal connection. And this is basically the essence of the extent to which students can build deeper relationship with those non-university stakeholders in these contexts. Um, this points to the next order of our outcomes, the role of the self and the role of the other. Basically, students can interpret these experiences as having to do with them. I can learn, I can be better, I can become a better engineer, I'm a good person, or with respect to what it means for the other. We can help deliver a service, we can provide them with a solution, we can ease some of their pain, etc. And so if we look at these 5 themes together, um, interpretation of these starts to develop something of along the lines of a model. And so if we work from top down, we could establish a community-based learning structure in which encountering unfamiliarity, meaning embracing and addressing crossing that border, naming that border, and explicitly asking why that border is there, and then building connections with the individuals who are there on the other side of that border, so the community. So can we confront why the border is there and can we build a bridge across that? At that point, it's important for students to recognize that their selves, how this impacts them as individuals, and how it impacts others are both equally relevant. We find that students tend to push towards one or the other and don't often know when one or the other is more relevant. And so we're finding that if we can teach students to look at both of those in different times and spaces in service learning, it can become a positive platform for empathy development. And so I'm going to quickly point to some implications for what this work means so far. We're finding that this concept of the traveling classroom is appearing. Where basically, even in the service learning context, so let's say students fly across the ocean to Asia, and students sometimes behave as if they're still in an engineering classroom, expecting to have be involved in traditional engineering teaching and learning. I need to get my grade. I need to finish this on time. And this is, I'm going to interact with my team members to do a good project. There's so much more that could be here. And so part of this is asking, how do we melt away the concept of a classroom from these service learning efforts? Next is this concept of ice breaking, that the idea of the shock. So in their own words, students constantly talk about the shock and the eye-opening experiences that they confronted in these new environments. And so we can help students not be overwhelmed, and we can help them learn in more positive ways if we prepare them explicitly for what they will go through. And ultimately, our initial results indicate that through continued research, service learning and community-based learning can be a valuable platform for developing empathy, but we must teach our community, the instructors and the students, of how it can be included. And so this brings us back to our assumption. And so rather than saying that students can learn hands-on skills by developing engineering solutions to communities in need, we can perhaps adjust this to say that service learning can support important learning outcomes through linking social and technical elements in engineering, right? And empathy being a powerful way to do that. So rather than it being about technical, how does this help me as an engineer bring my technical practice closer to what the world really needs? And so that's our counter story for this second assumption that we can all work as a community to embrace within service learning and community-based learning. All right, how's everybody doing? I asked that so that I could take a drink. Let's move on to our third and final project. We will dispel an assumption. And so this last one, service learning, is atheoretical and university centric. Now, this one I just think is problematic. And this one, you can see how it's embedded across the others. This one kind of points to the idea that service learning is good. You know, it kind of suggests, let's just do this because service learning is good, our students are good, and good things will happen. And so we will address this one by looking at our third project. And so in order to explore the space, we will again look at what happens in service learning and engineering. So here, this box, this magical box, this is a service learning and engineering context. In general, oftentimes, this can be split between teaching and practice of service learning and research of service learning. In order to make that happen, you have the researcher or the PI, as well as the instructor, where the professor PI will more often look at how the research is conducted in the space, and the professor instructor will look at teaching and implementing it. Beyond that, we have the community partners. Oh, I'm sorry, I'll take a step back. And so here, right, these two individuals, or sometimes one of them and one and the same person, decide on the context, right, and how they want to direct their course. Within that, then they generally will identify a community partner with whom they're interested in working with, or who has a relevant problem to be solved, right? We then have students in the service learning class will generally perform the work and perform the service, while a research assistant will collect the data. All of these individuals interact and communicate to differing extents within the service learning context, sometimes one directional, sometimes two directional, and these collectively lead to the outcomes, which generally will prioritize student development while creating, right, to various extents, some community impact. And so ultimately, this results in a dynamic where certain members in this context have more power and more sway and get to direct the problems which are solved and how more so than others. So this results in service learning and engineering that is university centric, where students are prioritized over the outcomes established for the community. However, research in community engagement has really made substantial advancements in more equitable ways to pursue service learning. Yet engineering hasn't yet embraced that new knowledge and hasn't worked it in, right, the knowledge of community engagement and how to make service learning more equitable. So in short, all of that research really says it must be based in partnership and equity must remain central. And so this model here that you see on the slide, this kind of must go away. And so while the characteristics needed in service learning partnership are well understood, mainly trust, communication, authenticity embedded in partnership, frameworks for developing these characteristics in engineering context are limited. And so overall, this points to the idea in the literature that service learning will not reach its potential if it is not conducted from within reciprocal partnership. And so what did we do about that? And so here we have collaborative research that is supported by our co-PI, Dr. Chris Radcliffe, and supported by the graduate research fellow, Nathan Harris. And now Nathan is a wonderful community activist and a youth pastor with deep ties here in Columbus. The city is lucky to have him, and as he moves forward in his career, he will seek to work as an educational consultant, developing culturally relevant computer science education for Black communities here in Columbus. Nathan's a wonderful person. Cheers to him and all the amazing thing that he does on a daily basis. And so in this research, right, we set out to explore reciprocal partnership in service learning. And by reciprocal, we mean that the parties involved benefit mutually from the needs addressed and actions taken and outcomes obtained within service learning. And so we recognize that through the service learning theory and the theory of community engagement, that we could pursue deeper outcomes. We could pursue social justice from within a reciprocal partnership, but we didn't have one. And so to pursue this, Dr. Ratcliffe immersed himself in the local, sustainable, and urban agriculture community here in Columbus. He patiently established relationships with those in the space until one day at an event, he heard a question asked about how can community sustainable agriculture create positive impact when it's steeped in and dominated by patriarchy and racism. And so that question piqued his interest, and he was like, hey, whoever asked that, that might be a good person for me to be a partner with. So the woman who asked that question is Paula Neighbor. And some of you have heard more about this partnership in Chris's presentation last year. But fast forward almost 2 years from when that question was asked, and we believe that we have established what is a reciprocal partnership with Paula and her sons, Charles and Damon, and who collectively run a nonprofit garden established in memorial to her late husband and their father, Charles Madison Neighbor, and the Charles Madison Neighbor Memorial Garden. And so our partnership that's going on 2 years now is pursuing social justice outcomes for a local, predominantly Black community in Columbus in 2 ways. The first, through providing access to healthy food within a food insecure neighborhood. And 2, through creating opportunities for neighborhood youth to be exposed to STEM education. This partnership supports university outcomes by providing the context for a service learning course and serving as a platform for data collection and research for our lab group. And so how do these seemingly complex concepts come together to form a reciprocal partnership? Well, let's explore that a little deeper. And so our work is oriented towards a specific community through us collectively working to position ourselves as an extension of a Black church. And we seek to embody parts of what the Black church represents. For example, unity, faith, hope, and empowerment. And so the Charles Madison Neighbor Memorial Garden is situated on the grounds of the Church of Christ of Apostolic Faith here on the east side of Columbus. Paula and her sons are 4th and 5th generation congregants of that church. The garden and the church are the physical site of the service learning course. Moving on to our next bubble, we pursue alleviating food insecurity by strengthening the garden in 4 ways. 1, its ability to produce food. 2, by providing increased number of volunteers. 3, by supporting some engineering solutions. And by 4, the addition of a farming robot. And so these provide the context in which undergraduate students can make contributions to the garden itself. Lastly, STEM education is pursued in several ways. One, so basically we utilize the farming robot and the garden as a space for informal arts integrated STEM education, so STEAM Ed through the garden. The service learning course has established the robot as an educational platform. We developed curricula, we developed signage, and we've helped implement a K-12 summer camp. And Nathan Harris has led the camp implementation and used that to pursue, to gain further inspiration for what he's ultimately now doing in his dissertation research. Furthermore, my research collects data from all of this collectively. And so this points to the research that we're actually doing embedded in all of this. And for sake of time, I'll go through this quickly. But basically, all of our members of our partnership initiated what is called a collaborative inquiry. where basically we get together and talk, and we systematically and iteratively explore the problems within our community of practice, so within our group. And what's the problem that we're exploring, right? How do we advance our partnership when we know that the university members have more power in general in this partnership? And so collectively, we sought to answer the research question, what factors within the community academic partnership support initiating the relationship in ways that promote an equitable distribution of power and voice? So that's our research question. And so basically, in response to that top-down model that we showed earlier, this is what we've tried to do. And so then rather than separating research, teaching, and community impact, we just tried lumping them all together. We do them all at the same time. Instead of prioritizing the university members, we said everyone is equitable and everyone is flat. So we sought to level the playing field. And so, after weekly 2-hour meetings across more than 6 months, many iterative conversations, recording, transcribing, and analyzing our discussions, we believe that we have some relevant findings that will help others in initiating reciprocal community academic partnerships. This what I'm talking about now is in review at the Michigan Journal of Community Service Learning, so we hope this paper will come out sometime soon. And so what did we find? We found 3 themes. The first is leaning on prior experiences. And so each of us came into this partnership recognizing what we've learned through our prior experiences, and basically recognizing that the members can come in with the knowledge and disposition necessary to deal and interact with the other partners in meaningful ways. And so, for example, when Chris first started volunteering at the garden, Paula thought that he was a student. Chris didn't come in and say, hey, I'm a professor. I need the service learning class, and this is what we're going to do. He humbly worked in the garden for a while. And that links to our next theme as well, operating outside of status. And so this is an approach where people enter the partnership in ways that maintain humility, harness their expectations, yet show diligence towards making contributions to the partnership. And our last theme is the idea of cross-pollination. And so rather than jumping in and being like, hey, we want to work on robotics, we need this robotics project, we came in and we just let the intersections of our interests and our abilities emerge naturally. And so it took time, it was a little slow, but ultimately we were able to merge our interests, and this ultimately cultivated a strong level of group cohesion. The Nabrits, the Ratcliffes, the Harrises, my family, we all know each other very well now. We're friends, we're family, and we believe that we have a wonderful, powerful partnership that can serve as a model for others doing similar work moving forward. And so this takes us back to our third assumption, that service learning is atheoretical, not embedded in theory, and that the university is prioritized. And so, like I said, this one just has to go. And so instead, right, our research points to several ways that this can be constructed. But in general, research and theory can inform how to develop and maintain reciprocal engineering community-based learning partnerships. And so we'll leave that at that. All right, so this brings us back to some of the pressing issues in our world today. And, I would like to take some time for us as a group to have a discussion about this. And so, what are some of the ways that we can explicitly link service learning and its impacts to Black Lives Matter, to COVID, to the challenges of being a student of color in the College of Engineering, and to the intersection of all these issues, right? Service learning as a real world experiential form of education should be able to provide solutions to some of these challenges, even within an engineering context. So I just wanted to open up some space for all of us. What are your ideas? How can we link these things together? You can unmute yourself and just throw out an idea. 15 minutes left, I think. One thing I always tell students in my classes is that awkward silence is okay. Someone's going to say something. Let's do it. No?
I feel like this is Nikki Sahatska from the University of Georgia. Hi,
Hey,
David.
Nikki.
I
Hey.
feel like a lot of your ideas are applicable. I mean, the breaking down of hierarchies is one. I mean, there are certainly hierarchies between faculty and students, and maybe even more strongly perceived hierarchies between minority groups and faculty members. So I feel like that theory that you're bringing around that could be applicable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. And so does anyone else have something else to add?
So I've found, hi everyone, this is Claire Swigert, Program Director for Service Learning here at Ohio State. And I found working with faculty in the service learning realm, a lot of times while they're experts in their specific discipline, the idea of discussing these sort of parallel content topics makes them very nervous and uncomfortable. And they don't really know what to do when issues come up in discussion or there's a red flag in a reflection prompt. And so I'm curious how you see your research being disseminated and informing instructors who are really well-meaning, passionate, want to be able to do this work, but it's so far out of their comfort zone that they don't know how to do it.
Yes, so that's an excellent question and actually points to something that I didn't put in this presentation. But what you're speaking about will be something that I directly pursue in the career proposal that I've submitted. And so I agree with you. I think many are well-meaning, but many don't recognize how all of us collectively are embedded within a hierarchical and a racist and oppressive society. And so many of the actions and many of the things that we do are reinforcing racism and oppression without us knowing. And so in my career proposal, I'm proposing kind of taking service learning educators through basically a workshop of critical reflexivity to allow them to reflect on their own identities and then deconstruct the way that their identities are impacting the way that they're implementing their service learning course and what students are learning as a result. And so that's part of my future work that I look forward to addressing exactly what you asked. Um, and, and Claire, I'd be happy to speak to you about that more as well moving forward. Back to this discussion about, the Black Lives Matter movement and COVID-19, I appreciate Nikki's response, that some of the things that I'm speaking about does point to ways that we can support these pressing challenges. But I will agree that this conceptualization of service learning to support Black Lives Matter, to combat COVID, and to minimize the impact of the racial unrest in our society is difficult for us to conceptualize. I think it's really important for us as engineering educators and citizens and people and parents and family members to really ask ourselves, why is that the case? Why is this so hard for me to come up with a solution from a pedagogy that's designed to make societal change? Why can't I put it into this context? And so I think if I'm gonna point fingers at anybody, I must first point these fingers at myself. Um, I admit that I felt uneasy putting this slide in this presentation. I was to myself, am I doing enough? Can I be doing more? Can I pivot and orient my work more critically towards these pressing issues? And so I asked myself, am I doing enough? And so upon reflecting on that, I think the answer is always no, and the answer should always be no. But nonetheless, in line with what Nikki was saying, I do think that the work that I've been doing points in this direction. First, encounters with cultural difference. We must teach our students and beyond, we must teach everyone to understand how to engage with, understand, and benefit from encounters with cultural difference in both professional, engineering settings, and daily life. Too often we assume that this takes care of itself. Put people together, they'll work it out. I think we can see where this has gotten us as a society. Our students will soon be professionals. They will soon be our leaders. And so dealing with people who are different than them, must be taught so engineers and all of us can learn to embrace difference as a strength. Right? We must take actions so that we all clearly recognize the value of Black lives, the value of the marginalized, and the value of the oppressed. Saying Black Lives Matter shouldn't be a problem. If we all recognize that that difference, that Blackness brings strength, it's a beautiful thing. And so, right, we're hoping that community-based learning can be a platform to make these things happen. Next, empathy through community-based learning. So empathy ultimately is action-based, right? It's the capacity to step into someone else's shoes, understand their lives, and then step out of it back into your life as a changed person and act on what you've learned to solve and support an issue or problem from that perspective. Right? We must learn to connect to these challenges within the Black Lives Matter movement, within all of these things. Embrace the concept of Blackness, feel as if those challenges were my own, as if I was being oppressed by police, and learn to act on those perceived emotions, right? This is lacking in engineering. We know that it's masculine. We know that it's logical oriented. Can we teach our engineers to feel more and learn from that feeling? I think as engineering educators, we can all do more here. Lastly, reciprocal partnership. And so in general, right, communities of color are resilient, beautiful, asset-filled communities with lots of embedded knowledge and expertise, right? We must recognize that and develop our capacity as engineers to engage as partners, not assuming that we know best, not assuming that engineers can save the world, but recognizing each person has their own expertise and each person can make contributions. Right? We can teach engineers to place themselves alongside peers from all walks of life, walk with them, and work with the strengths of each individual to create solutions to problems together. And so, thank you, Nikki, I think for the comment and a little bit of a compliment. I do think that my work is doing these things, but it can do more. And so what more is there? I think there's much more to be done. I think we can establish community-based learning contexts that directly confront systemic racism, directly confront oppression, and promote equity. I think the partnership with the Garden is touching on this, but could it be even more direct? Additionally, we need to further the ability of faculty and students to conceptualize, pursue, and commit to long-term partnerships that are directed at social justice. This is a little bit of a departure, and I think this requires the melting away of the classroom, because we cannot have semester-long projects that really make meaningful change towards social justice. Lastly, is promote understanding of how engineering and injustice intersect on an everyday level. As engineers, we are not isolated from the Black Lives Matter movement. I see Ray on the camera right here, and I know many other colleagues stepped up and produced masks and did a lot of things to help be a solution to the COVID-19 scenario, right? And so I think social issues of pandemic, issue of racial unrest, engineers need to recognize that they can and should be central in these contexts to really make positive change. And so I think these are some of the ideas that I would like to point to that suggest how we can support transforming service learning and engineering to be transformational and support social justice. And so I've lost track of time, but I think I'm good. I wanted to say thank you to everyone, especially to my wonderful 3 grad students. They know that I love them and they're wonderful. And the rest of our partners. We do not do this work alone. Each of our partners really supports our ability to do this work. And so we thank each of you all from the bottom of our hearts. Here's some of our publications. The ones that are highlighted in yellow are the ones that are linked to the projects that I've spoken about. And we would be able to provide you with those papers and the ones that are not yet finished yet as well. And lastly, thank you. Here's our coordinates, our website, our Twitter, our Instagram, all that. I apologize for being long. I tend to do that. I'm available for questions after. And I'm really hoping that rather than just a seminar with a few questions, that this turns into a conversation our lab team, the Inclusive Community-Based Learning Lab, is available to continue pushing on this front and making service learning more relevant to engineering and society. So thank you.
Hey, David, is the slides going to be, or the presentation going to be available to show others?
Probably. I think there might be a small fee associated with that, but we could probably arrange for that. No, I'm kidding. Yeah,
I know.
yeah, sure. I would be happy to send the slides to anybody who wants them.
Yeah, I would like to actually, if I could get a copy of the presentation, some of my colleagues, I think, would really be interested to hearing about this work.
Sure, great. Thank you.
Yeah, you did a really great job, and I love the changing the conversation on each assumption and reframing it.
I appreciate it. Any other questions? I'm panning through the chat. I appreciate all the support. It really makes a big difference, so thank you.
I'm afraid I have to take off, but I appreciate the presentation a lot, David, and
Thank
all
you.
of you, Amina, Nathan, Jade. So it seems like it's the idea of really caring about the impact is something that's often missed in service learning and just engineering learning in general. So it's a really extremely valid and crucial part of the mix, and I appreciate your work there.
Thank you, Ray.
Can you talk a little bit more, David, about sorry, a truck is going by, about the intentions with the empathy-based learning modules that you all have developed? Do you have a plan as to how you want to incorporate that into a variety of courses at the university?
I appreciate that question very much. We have, I'm sorry, who asked that question?
Sorry, this is Kristen Conroy.
Hey, Kristen. So we have had some initial conversations with Claire, who made a comment earlier, and Ola Alkvist, who leads the Office of Student Engagement. They have supported this research. I'm sorry, I don't know if you lost me. They supported this research through a letter early on. And the concept is that we would work with the university and the university level Office of Service Learning to find an appropriate way to work with other instructors to bring this into this class. The University Institute of Teaching and Learning offers a service learning curriculum development workshop every summer. And so we're trying to find ways to explicitly promote this idea across service learning courses. Beyond that, Nikki Sohatska, Joachim Walther, and myself and some others will have a publication coming out in Advances in Engineering Education, I believe next month, that points to teaching empathy and propagating it as an innovation across engineering education. And so that will point to some of the ways that we can make this empathy broadly across engineering be more of a central element, and then our work specifically in service learning and community-based learning. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that does. Thank you very much.
Great.
Okay, we are right at 4 o'clock. So thanks again to everyone who joined us. And if you need to head out, please feel free to do so, but we'll stay on the call and keep the conversation going for those of you who could stay. But thanks everybody, and thank you, David.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm not going nowhere, so I don't have anywhere to go. Now is when the real questions come out. Uh-oh. I'm ready. No, I should say we're ready because I'm going to defer to the lab group for the answers. Someone's gonna have to get Nathan back on the call.
What do you think we can do to promote the creation of more service learning courses in like traditional engineering like framework?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to get your name who asked the question.
Matt.
Hey, Matt. So thanks for the question. I think that's a tricky one because I think the concept of more is complicated. And I think we want it to be the right. So anyone who's starting new service learning or new service learning course, we want them to start the right kind of service learning. And so I'm not sure if thinking that this is necessarily for everyone, but really, how do we appeal to people who want to pursue more, people who want to really orient their efforts towards social justice and community impact? So that's the first part. Beyond that, I think the work that my lab group is doing, once we find more of a rhythm, I think we can elevate what we're doing to levels of workshops, towards more presentations, towards more seminars like this, where we can really directly interact with our colleagues and help them to make these things happen. And again, it's not that we know how, but it's just that we've been thinking about it for some time. And so I think it's a lot of personal relationships mixed with grunt work to really inspire people to push themselves and learn how to do this in the right way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Jade, Amina, anything to add?
Yeah, I was just gonna add, also thinking about, if you're looking at the traditional engineering classroom, you can just think about the dynamics that you have with peers. We have diversity in our own classrooms that we can start thinking about how is it that we can inform the way we manage teams in our courses, rather than just focusing on making sure that we have multicultural teams or multidisciplinary teams. What can we do as like a next step to make sure that what's actually happening throughout the team conversations and the teamwork throughout the year is also in fact impactful on how people deal with encountering with those differences in their group. How do they leverage the concepts like empathy and partnership when they're working with their group? And so those are some of the ways that you can think outside of the service learning context, what to kind of focus on in the traditional classroom.
Yeah, and I think from like an empathy perspective, it is a concept that really links the self to the other. So part of the research that I was concluded, the main takeaway is, but before you go on to a site and do service learning, knowing yourself, checking your privilege and identity is the most important starting point in service learning contexts.
I should have just let you two give the talk.
We're cheerleading leaders.
Any other questions or thoughts or ideas?
So David, one of the things you mentioned, and I agree 100%, one of the problems is the short term we try and cram these sort of projects into to fit our semester schedule. Any thoughts on how we get universities to enable us to give course credit for them working over 2 semesters over a multi-year project, right? So they're doing part of the work. They didn't start it, they don't finish it. How do I convince my department I should still be able to count that as their capstone project, for example?
That's a question that I don't have an answer for. But, it shouldn't matter. Honestly, it shouldn't matter. Like, I recognize that like accreditation and checking the boxes is a huge part of higher education. But I think it's a limitation in creativity of people to not really think that we can hold people accountable in other ways. Again, it wouldn't be everyone, it wouldn't be, you know, but in the right instances, can you find other ways to obtain credit? I think it's a lack of creativity that people would suggest that we cannot. And I think, right, it's one of the main limitations of saying, I need this to finish the semester. And so I appreciate the question very much. I don't have an answer. Maybe we can bend the rules a little bit, independent study. I don't know, but that doesn't fit into like the mapping, right? I think it's a serious limitation. There are other models that work, the volunteerism and co-curricular models. So NSBE, the National Society of Black Engineers, SHIP, the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, they do a bunch of wonderful community-based learning efforts that are linked to their own professional development and their own identities as people of color that don't give them course credit. The things that they're able to do are powerful and impactful. Unfortunately, they are not benefiting from it because they're not getting, not benefiting curricularly because they're not getting course credit for it. And so there are models that work outside of the semester paradigm. But I mean, I'd be ready to, you know, make some noise about how we can find ways to make multi-semester courses credit bearing.
David, I have a question. This is Carolyn Summerick.
Hey, Carolyn.
Hi. So making those contacts with organizations. So you were talking about a church, or it could be, you know, a business. I'm wondering about how can we kind of how do we extend these opportunities for this mutual benefit to organizations in the community, whatever they might be, and the university, the students. You know, for example, I teach a class that it's in our core, and we have a semester-long project in there, and the students go in and find the companies to partner with over the semester. And, you know, sometimes that's a challenge for them to do that. And it's also very limiting because, you know, I think there are certainly a lot of organizations that could benefit from even a semester, but potentially being in a pool that the relationship is longer than the semester, that it may be a semester for just this group of students, but then the following semester, there might be another project or, you know, an extension of that. And so I'm wondering how those, I mean, I understand that, I know that it takes, you know, a lot of one-on-one time with organizations to build up that trust with the individual organization and the members of it. But I'm just wondering how to do that maybe on a, I know it can't be sped up, but I'm just wondering how to do that in a way that maybe starts developing this pool or this consortium of entities within the community that are open to partnering with groups in the university or faculty or students in the university?
So there's been efforts to make that happen in kind of institutions and groups that are often referred to as like clearinghouses. And it's kind of, it's a tricky thing. And I think this is another excellent question that I don't think has an easy answer. Basically, it's how do you mass produce authentic relationships? or even how do you quickly align a need and an asset in two different people, or two different groups. And I think that becomes really complex, because just because one person has a need and another person has an asset doesn't mean that those two individuals will work in a meaningful way. And so unfortunately, I think this is the type of thing where this, matchmaking in essence is much more complex than I think a lot of us, well, you think about us in our own lives and perhaps like our relationships and dating and whatnot. There are a lot of people who on paper would be like, oh, that'd be a great person for you. But then they're just not, you're not compatible. And so I would, similarly to the question asked by Brian, right, this is a thing that it seems like we could have a solution here. But what I've learned on the flip side is that having a relationship emerge naturally, building on that relationship and then investing in it, and right, the slow growth approach can work. The other stuff can work as well. But I don't have, I think it's a very good point. I don't know that I have an answer for that. Any ideas, Amina, Jade?
I think a similar question to that, Claraline. This question is, how do we establish some of kind of evaluation or supervision on those partnerships developed? Is there a way that we kind of know that a standard to develop those partnerships? Yeah, I think that's a really good question for us to think about.
Yeah, there are offices, right? Again, the clearinghouse model works. I think Northeastern has one. I think one of the people was on the call here. But I think anytime a pairing is done hastily, it can be hit or miss. And so then maybe the solution would be to have a quick out. If you pair people together and it's a miss, place them somewhere else relatively quickly. Maybe that would, in a numbers game, make relationships in the long term perhaps work out in this context.
Dave.
Hey,
Dave. When did you start this work, Dave?
I started this work at the University of São Paulo in Brazil.
Oh, really?
Dr. Cardoso here is my mentor during my postdoc at my time at the University of São Paulo in Brazil. And so Cardoso, truthfully, all of this work and all of these ideas really emerged from the work that we did together. And it's just, I think it's an extension of that work. I think the distinction is that at the time that I was working with you, I was really just kind of dipping my feet into the field of engineering education. And so I think now, 6 or 7 years later, and working with wonderful colleagues like Emily Dringenberg and wonderful students, I now have a better fluency of what the field is and how educational research methods can be used to produce high quality outcomes. And so this work is just a continued evolution of the work that we started together in São Paulo.
And how difficult is to reproduce it in a country like Brazil? Do you have an idea?
So, I think this matches Caroline's question about pairing people together. One of the things that our team is working on, I can share with you the paper, but our partnership with the Church of Christ of Apostolic Faith, where churches have space. You can put a garden in a church. A church has a congregation. Specific churches serve specific demographics. I think the model that we have with the church, with the garden, is transferable. And so I do think that we could craft that as something that could be replicated. There are other people in the field. Mary Beth Lima, she has a program that installs playgrounds. That's been shown to be transferable. And a playground doesn't seem like it would be oriented towards social justice, but they are, in fact. They correlate to inequities. And so, yeah, in time, Cardoso, I would love to, continue to work with USP and find ways that we can try and do, replicable parts of our research in Brazil.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Congratulations.
And your English sounds great, Cardoso. When I was with him, he was really dove into English, and so it's gotten much better.
I know. My English is very, very poor.
No, sounds great.
I think people must have more questions and discussion points, so I hate to cut it off, but our norm is that we reserve until 5 o'clock for you to meet with just graduate students and engage with them. So I'm going to ask that we end here. People are welcome to reach out to me. I'll have access to the recording. You know how to get in touch with us, hopefully. So thank you so much, David. Thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.